Most Greeks referred to figures as schemes, because they were often used for persuasive tricks and arguments. Some common figures include analogy, oxymoron, hyperbole, and rhetorical questions. Coyness is the "oh no, you shouldn't have" figure. It's saying the opposite of what you really mean. Dialogue is used to add realism to storytelling. It repeats a conversation for rhetorical effect. For example, Joey: "So you let Robin taking your favorite cat?" Andrea: "Oh, Robin insisted on taking him in. He was all like, 'All I need in my life to be complete is a cat and stuff.' I did what any good friend would do." Speak around is using a description instead of a name. An example is referring to Miss Shannon as a great holder of literary secrets instead of Miss Shannon. Figures of speech come in three varieties: figures of speech, figures of thought, and tropes. Figures of speech change and warp ordinary language through repetition, sound, and wordplay. They catch people's attention. Tropes swap one image or concept for another. A metaphor is a trope. It makes one thing stand for another. For example, all the world's a stage. Irony is a trope as well because it swaps the apparent meaning for a real one. A synecdoche swaps the thing for a collection of things. For example, the word sails is often used to refer to a whole ship. Figures of thoughts are the styles that rhetoric can take, the way that an argument is approached. Metonymy swaps the part for the whole. One famous example of metonymy is the saying, "The pen is mightier than the sword," which originally came from Edward Bulwer's play. This sentence has two examples of metonymy. The pen stands in for the written word, and the sword stands in for military aggression and force. In short, figures of speech switch words around, figures of thought use argument mini tactics, and tropes make a word stand for something different from its usual meaning. Anaphora, or repeated first words, gives continuity and flow to oral speech. Multiple yoking is a play-by-play description of something often used in sports commentary. It lets you speak fast in a logical argument to overwhelm your proponent. Idioms combine words in an inseparable way so that each word has a meaning of its own. Self-answering questions are often used by protesters because asking the question can arouse curiosity of the audience about the answers. A well-timed pause between the question and the answer can heighten the effect. For example, in the protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline, protesters were chanting, "What do we want? Protected Renew." Clichés are actually a great resource, although people avoid them entirely. To make a point, one can transform clichés by adding surprise twists or by taking them literally. Most clichés are absurd sounding when you take them literally. This can throw off your opponent. Most clichés are actually metaphors and tropes in their own way.
The Yodo technique, transforming a banal idiom by switching words. The Yodo technique is also known as the mighty chiasmus, which is a mirror image of a concept that rebuts your opinions by playing them backwards. Make these more interesting by adding humor. Here we can see an example of the mighty chiasmus through Kennedy. Without the chiasmus, instead of seeking help from government, you should volunteer for it, and with the chiasmus, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Which sounds more powerful to you? Applying the simplest figures of thought will improve your argument significantly. Dialysis offers a distinct choice, either we do this or we do that, and antithesis weighs one argument next to another. An antithesis is particularly effective when it makes you sound objective. A version of objectivity is to edit yourself out loud or to use a no-yes sequence. Here is an example of a no-yes sequence. Him, what a qualified candidate. Her, candidate, yes, qualified, no. And here's an example of editing yourself. I'm much more qualified than those people, except for her. She is much better than I am. You can turn the volume down with litotes that can affirm the negative and make you seem cooler, or turn the volume up with a climax that uses overlapping words in succession and allows readers to mentally fill in blanks. What is amplification? Adding more information in order to increase a word's understandability. This can be very useful when building an argument towards climax.
Anthemaria, aka verbing. Any novel change in a word's use, such as noun to verb, verb to noun, or noun to adjective. Parcelon, Word that gets stripped of its meaning and used as a place filler. It is a misuse of anthemaria. Example, you know, like, so.
Hearing your vision. Make your audience hear what they want to hear. Politicians are known for being great speakers. It essentially is their job. However, many do not realize that their speech utilizes a code that attracts an audience to them by using keywords. These keywords unlock its directed audience's approval. The term for using keywords to better connect to an audience is known as code grooming. The speech of George Bush makes exemplary use of code grooming. Examples of George Bush using code grooming. When talking to Army members, Bush used never relent to make himself seem more authoritative, and when speaking to Christians, Bush's speech was structured like Bible verses. In addition to directing words towards his target audience, Bush would also speak in a very indirect and poetic form of speech. This technique is called the sound of sense. The sound of sense was originally coined by Robert Frost. The term describes the use of speech that leaves logic behind and creates more of a poetic journey that makes the heart understand instead of the head. Why use sound of sense? Bush perhaps used such a poor arrangement of words because it allowed listeners to hear speech that was dumbed down for the typical American voter, while also leaving their ears with the only words that described him truly, or even engaged the selective hearing that most are guilty of possessing. Avoid the monsters. Do not say what you do not mean. Much like the code words Bush utilized, the great thinker Aristotle had very similar beliefs in regards to language. He believed that in speech there should be commonplace words, and these words should be repetitively used to convey an overarching tone as well as idea. By using words multiple times, a listener begins to interpret them in a manner that uses selective hearing.
How to use your audience's identity. Knowing your audience's identity will shape the way you persuade them. This helps you use techniques that work best on your audience and will get you the best results. Identity strategy can help or hurt you and the audience's relationship depending on how well you use identity strategy. You want to find a way to succeed in the argument but also please your audience. How code grooming works. Irony is the way you speak to certain people. Like what you'd say to get on a teacher's good side versus what you'd say to get on a classmate's good side. People either get your language or they don't, and that either bonds or separates you. When you connect with some people through irony and code grooming, you'll always exclude others who don't get it. That bonding helps strengthen your ethos with the audience. For example, advertising to teenagers will interest and unite youth, but it will disinterest adults and young children and turn them away. Code language is specific words that unite or break an audience. For example, if you have an Apple computer, you're more likely to vote Democratic. This stereotype by association categorizes people and forms code grooming.
created using Powtoon.